You're listening to the Wall Street Ledger. Welcome to all of our listeners. Our featured guest is International Battery Metals, currently traded shares on a Canadian stock exchange on ticker IBAT, as well over-the-counter markets ticker RHHNF. Joining us today to speak a little bit more about the company and its projects, its technology, is Dr. John Burba. He's the president and CEO. Dr. Burba, thank you for joining us here at the Wall Street Ledger.
Well, thank you for having us on.
So for our listeners who want to know more, why don't you talk about the current lithium extraction technology at the company?
Certainly. We use a technology that is very highly specific for lithium. We use an absorbent that absorbs lithium and chloride ions with almost total selectivity. And we have a process that is designed around that allows us to extract very high percentages of the lithium. And we do not have to employ a lot of chemicals for the recovery of the lithium from the absorbent. Ion exchange systems, for instance, you have to use acid and base to regenerate the resins. This absorbent doesn't require that. We just use water. We have, this is a technology that I invented a number of years ago and sold to FMC Corporation, and then participated in the design of their plant that went into Argentina and started up in 1998. And it's been operating ever since. So the current version of this technology, we're using selective absorption again. We have made some improvements to the absorbent, but more importantly, we have made some serious improvements on the actual process and process equipment. So our system now is much smaller than what we built back in the 1990s at FMC. So the IBAT version is small enough that we can put it on skids and in containers, and yet recover a higher percentage of the lithium than the FMC plant can. The advantage of containerizing it is that we can build this in fab shops. That's much faster on a build. We can ship it to the location, install it, and start it up and be producing lithium very rapidly. So the typical time frame for building a lithium extraction plant is between 8 and 14 years before it's actually producing significant amounts of lithium. FMC's plant was around 5 years. We believe that we will be able to build the equipment, put it on location, and start it up in something in the range of 1 year. Plus, our capital cost is significantly lower than the competing technologies. So our goal is to be able to put our technology in fast enough and proliferate it very rapidly so that we can meet the staggering demand for lithium that is being currently projected. The other piece to our technology is that we're operating on a virtually 100% water recycle. So our intent is to not draw take water away from indigenous peoples that happen to surround some of these salars. The system is also capable of taking the waste brine, and re-injecting it into the salar. That is something that has to be permitted in each country and particularly for each resource. So if the government allows us to do that, that is our desire, because we don't want to make a lot of salt piles out on the desert. And so the net of this is that our intent is to recover in excess of 90% or 95% of the lithium from the brine, re-inject that, reuse our water to a very high degree, and then produce very high purity lithium carbonate, lithium hydroxide. And there's good reason to believe that our purity is going to be excellent, because the process that I designed for FMC produces battery grade lithium carbonate. In fact, battery grade lithium carbonate, that term, is defined by FMC's lithium carbonate and has been for over 20 years. So the point here is that we believe that we can move into a solar and be in production faster than anyone else can, and with a very reasonable capital cost and very short time to production.
So talk about the current lithium market as a whole.
The lithium market is really, and just trying to be objective about this, the lithium market is a mess. Right now there are two producing resources for lithium. It's spodumene, which is a pegmatite ore. It's a hard rock mining operation, typically open pit, and it has all of the characteristics of an open pit mine. They have to use a lot of chemicals. There's a lot of high temperature roasting. There are the typical rock piles, tailings ponds, sludge pits, and the like. Typically, there's a lot of groundwater contamination from these things, from these ponds, because regardless of what somebody will tell you, every every waste pond leaks. It's impossible to make a non-leaking waste pond, and so it just generates a lot of environmental issues. The other typical process, or the other resource rather, is the salar brines. And so these are dominated by SQM, Albemarle, and FMC Corporation. And so SQM and Albemarle use a solar evaporation process in which they build huge and thousands of acres of huge shallow evaporation ponds, and it is a salt recovery process. So they pump the brine in, they drop out sodium chloride, then they shift the brine over to another pond, drop out various forms of potash and so forth, and ultimately end up with a lithium chloride stream that is very impure. Then there is a big chemical operation to try to purify that, which generates a lot of chemical waste, and then they can sell lithium carbonate. The problem with this is the recovery rates are very low. They're only in the range of 20 to 30% of the lithium in the brine. So approximately 70% or more of the lithium from that brine is wasted, which enhances their cost, their production cost, and it shortens the life of the salar dramatically. But their chosen chemistry and process dictates what they're going to get. FMC's process, because of the selective absorption process, um, generates very high purity system, but they're currently only producing in the range of about 40% of their lithium. And so in our new process, we believe we have corrected that shortfall, and it was an inefficiency issue that I think we've resolved. And so because of that, we're going to be seeing much higher recovery efficiencies. Now, people are talking about a lot of other resources. There's brines in the Clayton Valley, and recently smectitic clays in the Clayton Valley. People have talked about a lot of other things, and there are geothermal brines and things of that nature. Each one of these resources has potential. Each one of them has its own set of problems and different chemistries. So whomever goes in to work in these areas, they will have a laundry list of issues that they have to work out before they can bring one of these things on. The advantage of the selective absorption approach is that it's a direct lithium extraction process. And in fact, FMC's plant was the first direct lithium extraction plant ever built, and it's the only one that's operating. But nonetheless, selective absorption provides a huge advantage over most other approaches because it rejects virtually all of the other ions. But nonetheless, there's a lot of work has to be done on all of these things to be able to come up with a viable process.
Yeah, I'd like to also talk about when, years past when you developed and found that technology. If you could tell our listeners how you came upon the many of testing and the different challenges that you saw on your end in order to develop this technology.
Oh, certainly. Well, I started my career at Dow Chemical. I received my PhD in physical chemistry and went to work at Dow Chemical in what they were calling their advanced separation lab. And I was fortunate to work for a fellow named Bill Bauman, who was probably the most famous scientist that Dow's ever had. He was, for a long time, he was the vice president of technology for Dow. And then at the end of his career, he decided he wanted to go back into the lab. He set up this advanced extraction lab, and I was able to join that. And Dow was fixated on recovering lithium from their own resources. And Dow was a brine chemical company at the time, and they did have lithium in their brines. And so they had been working for well over a decade on various processes to recover lithium, none of which ever worked. And not surprisingly, a lot of what people have talked about in the last 4 or 5 years as new processes, I read reports on those very same processes when I went to work at Dow, and none of them worked. And the economics were poor, and recovery rates were poor. It was just a mess. And so, at any rate, Bill and some other guys have been working on a modified ion exchange resin before I joined the group, and then I came in and participated in that, and collectively we ended up coming up with this modified ion exchange resin absorbent that worked really well in the laboratory, but it was too expensive and it was uneconomical. There were a lot of big issues with it. And so Dow ended up ending the project in 1984. And then I stayed on with Dow, did some other things, and then decided to move on, and had accepted a job with another company and left Dow. And in the interim between those two companies, Bill called me and said that he wanted to talk about how we might make a better lithium absorbent. So we got together and took a completely different approach and invented the absorbent that FMC is currently using. And so we filed patent applications on it. And then I joined I joined FMC Corporation in 1993, I think, 92. Yeah, I think it was 93. And went to work for them. And at that time, they had a spodumene operation that the mine, they used up all the ore. So they had to close the mine. And they had enough stockpile for about 5 years of operation. And they had tried to use a solar evaporation process on a salar in Argentina called Salar Hombre Muerto. Unfortunately, their solar evaporation process failed. And it failed because of certain impurities in the brine. And they didn't have any choice. So they asked me if the inventions that Bill and I had come up with would work. And I told them I thought so. So then they didn't have any choice. They pretty much had to go with us. And so we negotiated a sale of the technology to FMC. And then I put together a significant team of people. We worked for about 6 or 8 months. We worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I had 4 shifts of engineers and technicians operating on that thing. And we came up with the basic process layout. We did a number of scale ups of the extraction system and the process to make the absorbent, and then transitioned that over to some pretty remarkable chemical engineers. I continued on in the project, helping out on that, and so I've been responsible for the process layout and basic equipment selection, and then they took it further. And amazingly, we got that thing designed and built at 14,000 feet in the Andes at Salar Hombre Muerto in 4.5 years from the time we kicked off the project. We used Fluor as our EMC, our EPC company, and they were fabulous. They did a super job. I was so impressed with them, and I'm not easily impressed by EPC companies. But Fluor did a great job for us. And at any rate, the plant started up in 1998 and has been producing the same quality lithium carbonate now for 23 years. And the reason that they don't have variance in their product quality is that the material that is delivered into that carbonate plant is virtually always exactly the same purity level. And so that's one of the characteristics of selective absorption processes. So at any rate, that's how we got to the first one. And so now, we're on what I call it version 3. Version 1 was the failure at Dow Chemical. And then version 2 was the FMC process, and version 3 is a significantly re-engineered process that we have now.
So I just want to tell our listeners, Dr. John Burba and I talk pretty regularly. I had a chance to just find something that he didn't mention, and I'd like to bring it up here on the podcast. Elon Musk offered one of your startups $325 million. Is that true? And if you could tell us a little bit about that situation and what happened.
Well, unfortunately that deal fell apart. That was Symbol, which was a lithium company designed to extract lithium from a geothermal brine operation in Southern California. A friend of mine had started that company up, and then he later left the company, and they asked me to come in as CEO, and so I agreed. I'd retired and then came out of retirement to do that. Thought it would be fun. And so Musk, Musk's staff contacted us and wanted to talk about our extraction process. So we discussed it with him, and so he offered us a significant amount of money for the company, and the VC company that owned Symbol wanted to see more money than what he offered. Typical negotiation kind of thing. So we got together and talked about having Jefferies evaluate the company, and we got the evaluation from Jefferies. But in the meantime, and I can't be really specific about what happened, but some other people entered the deal, and Musk decided to do a different kind of deal with them, and so our deal fell apart. So that was pretty much the nut of it. But it was an interesting relationship.
Yeah.
Short.
Well, what was he looking to get from the technology?
Well, he wanted high purity lithium hydroxide for battery operations.
Okay.
And that's what we were intending to make, was high purity lithium hydroxide.
Got it.
And his intent was I was on board with what he wanted to do, and it made a lot of sense. He uses, Tesla uses cathode materials that are made with lithium hydroxide rather than lithium carbonate. And there are some significant advantages to doing that with certain types of cathodes. But both hydroxide and carbonate are used to produce cathode materials. And so that was, so his intent was good. And I think he believed that he had found a better path to that lithium hydroxide of what we offered. And so the negotiations broke off.
What was it like? Were you able to speak to him ever? Or what was the interaction like?
Yeah, I had several conversations with Mr. Musk. He was very engaging, obviously very, very bright, very quick, picks up on stuff very quick, and it was interesting talking with him.
Wow.
But at the end of the day, it just didn't work. It did not work out.
No, it's nothing personal, strictly business, right? So let's switch gears a bit here. Yeah, and talk about the shareholder approval that you were looking to get. What was it? I saw it was for financing. Is that right?
Yeah. We are, in our first extraction unit,
Mhm.
IBAT is building that equipment because this is the very first one. And this is part of our contract with Consortia for operations in Chile and Argentina. So we agreed that we would build the first unit and test it out. And then, if it works, then they will buy that equipment back from us. And so we need to raise some more money to finish the construction on the extraction unit, and we're almost there. We don't have very much further, just a few more months for construction, but I can talk about that in a moment. So we needed to have a special shareholder meeting for this particular financing, and we needed to get the approval. We had to get approval of the majority of the minority shareholders for this particular investment. And so fortunately it passed by a huge margin. So our investor base has been very supportive of what we want to do, what we need to do. And like I said, it's for an obviously legitimate activity of finishing this first extraction system. So that's what that was about. We're all thrilled that it came in. There were a few other things. We wanted to expand our board of directors by seat, and so a few things like that. But pretty typical stuff that you would have in a board meeting.
Yeah. So let's switch gears and talk about that board and management team at the company. Your experience, especially in the space, and some others that are on the board and the current leadership at hand.
Sure, sure. Well, we have myself and Logan Anderson, our chief financial officer. We have a fellow named Dave Ryan, who has been in the mining space for decades, and they're all very, very supportive of what we're doing. We're going to expand that board by seat, and I can't talk about anybody yet because we have to have a formal acceptance with the individual that we're looking to bring on. But once as we bring other members on board, then I'll want to talk with you about them as we go forward. We also have established an advisory board, and in fact, I just got a formal acceptance from a gentleman named Gary Flowers, who was vice president of Fluor for international operations. And it's just interesting that the previous lithium project, we'd used Fluor, and I was really excited about their work. And then to be able to get to know Gary and work with him now has been really exciting as well. So Gary has a tremendous background in construction. And our go forward plan, of course, is to build a lot of these units and put them in remote locations. And that is exactly the kind of thing that Gary has done all of his career. And so he is going to be a phenomenal asset to us as an advisor to the company. So we're exceedingly excited about him. And we have three other folks that we've invited to join, and as they accept them, we'll talk about them as well. But what we're trying to do is bring expertise in each of the key areas that we have to deal with in the company. So the goal is to have an advisor on finance, advisor in capital markets, advisor in technology development, things like that, and then just an advisor on startups and how you make them work, how do you grow them into large companies. So it's a balanced approach on the advisory board, and we'll be taking a similar approach on our board of directors.
So talk about how the technology can help lithium mining stocks lower their cost and time as well with the current technology at IBAT.
Okay, so I think I want to start off with Benchmark's projection of lithium demand over the next 10 years or 9 years now. I think this was published in like October, November of last year. But Benchmark is projecting that the demand for lithium by 2030 will be 2.5 million metric tons on a lithium carbonate equivalent basis. They're also projecting that the industry, as it stands now, will only be able to produce about 1 million metric tons. So it is a stunning shortfall. And the big players aren't really doing much. And there are several reasons for that. So in Chile, there is such a controversy over all of the environmental mess that has been generated by the solar evaporation processes. Their hands are pretty well tied. And I think evidence of that is that Albemarle has now started an expansion on their Silver Peak operation in Nevada, which is also solar evaporation. So they're expanding in the U.S. rather than Chile. And I think the reason is Chile is difficult for them right now. And SQM has tried to expand, and that's not worked for them. So I think that there's not a whole lot that they can do. So the next thing is, on the spodumene, what people are doing is the miners are blasting the rock, crushing it, loading it in containers, and shipping it to China. And then once it's in China, nobody knows what happens from an environmental standpoint. I mean, you've got the silk curtain there, and they're not going to let you know what a mess they're making. And so, but that's how they've been making up the difference between, what was actually being produced by the brine operations and what was needed. So lithium production from brines has not grown much at all, if anything, over the last 4 or 5 years. So the spodumene production is what's really picked up. That's the issue. And one of the things that everybody needs to recognize and remember about chemical operations is that once you have established a process and built a plant to do a particular thing, then that process dictates essentially what you're going to get. So it will dictate the kind of waste materials that you have. It will dictate the level of contamination, environmental issues that you have. Going back after the fact and trying to fix that, there's only so much you can do. And so one of the things that we have done, and it was one goal that Bill and I had way back, was develop a process that was minimally invasive for lithium extraction. And that's what we were trying to do at FMC. And so now that I've got another go at this thing, we've pretty much pulled out all the stops to try to make this thing as gentle on the environment as we possibly can, because it's important, it's important messaging, but it's important reality as well. I do not want to leave as a legacy. I do not want to leave a lot of mess in places, and I do not want to spoil the lives of indigenous people, around these various salars. I don't want to mess. I don't want to cause those people any problems at all. And so the intent there is to be as clean and respectful of the people and the environment as we possibly can. Now, that's also a theme of what is driving this whole electrification thing. So we really need to shift lithium from being viewed as a dirty recovery process, into one that is environmentally superior. So that's what we're trying to do at IBAT, is create a truly environmentally superior process. And so there are other things that we're doing that I can't talk about now, but in the coming months we can go back and visit some of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll have you back. Now, with that being said, where do you see the company in the next 2 to 3 years? If you had a crystal ball.
Well, I think that our path, sure. So our path is, our big goal is to complete this first mobile extraction system. And by the way, it will be able to produce commercial quantities of lithium. That will not be a big extraction volume, but it will be commercially viable. And so the intent is to have all of that equipment completed um, within the next several months. We have run into some delays, and it's really COVID related. So there are some things that we need that the plants shut down or were delayed, because of the pandemic. And so we're having a little bit of trouble getting certain kinds of control equipment. And so we may or may not have a delay from that. It looks like we're finding ways of recovering. But if all of this works, midsummer roughly, everything will be mechanically complete. We're building this in fabrication shops in Louisiana. And so what we will do at that point is we will take all of the equipment to an area that is by a canal, and we will set it up and we'll water test it, make sure that everything is electrically, mechanically, and hydraulically secure, fine. We will load lithium into a portion of the extraction system, and then we will make an artificial brine and we will extract lithium from it and prove that. And then make sure that we've got things working. And then, we will probably be inviting the media and people to come out and see that. So hopefully we can get all of that done by, sometime September, October. Once we're satisfied that we've completed all of that, the equipment then will be loaded on a barge and shipped to Chile. Then it will be transported to a solar, and we're in the process of doing some permitting. So that may or may not be an issue for timing, but we'll move it out to the solar, put everything back together, and charge the rest of the extraction system, and then start producing lithium. So
So,
that is our goal. So that's this year. So in 2 to 3 years, we will have expanded that operation to a minimum of 20,000 tons. Actually, we're looking at 40,000 tons. And then I'm hoping to have at least one other uh, operation going outside of Chile or Argentina, and maybe two. And we are likely to have something going on in Argentina as well. And I would like to see our production being significantly more than 20,000 tons in aggregate. So that's the path forward for the next 3 years. That's our wish list.
then why should investors consider the company as a good long-term investment opportunity?
Well, our business model is to do joint ventures with solar holders or resource owners, and the idea there is that there's a lot of ownership in a lot of these resources, and we can partner with those resources and possibly with some financial investors in a joint venture. And then we can, IBAT will construct the equipment, we will operate the equipment, and then the joint venture will actually be the financial manager of the equipment. IBAT will participate in a number of ways in that, from a perpetual royalty basis, um, cost plus on the construction, cost plus on operation, plus we will own a piece of the JV ourselves. So, and this is modeled after what we've done with Insortia in Chile and Argentina. And so, the more of these we get, the more revenue we have coming into IBAT. And so, we think that it's a viable model as we go forward. Um, the the projection for lithium demand is so stunning. The shortage is remarkable, because when and honestly, the response of the major companies in this has been muted. Because when you look at something that is in the range of 54 to or greater percent shortfall projection in any other commodity industry, you would have companies cheering and going out and building new production at breakneck speed. I mean, the big producers are doing essentially nothing, and they're being remarkably quiet about it. And so, one can speculate on why that is. Clearly, the environmental issues with the brine operations is part of it. There may be other factors, but to me, it's an unusual response. So they're leaving a big void, and I want to fill that. I want IBAT to be, a major player in going in and producing lithium, because I love the idea of electric vehicles. I want to see that happen, as do most of the people in the world now. And
Yep.
that's one of the things that's happened to us is we've had a paradigm shift, and probably the majority of people that can afford to buy a car really would like to have electric vehicles. And so because of that, it's going to happen. And, I would like to be part of the reason that we can actually do that. And so that's the direction that we're going.
Yep. And we're excited here at the Wall Street Ledger to have you. It's been a pleasure, Dr. John Burba. Thank you for joining us again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Our featured guest, Dr. John Burba, President and CEO at International Batteries Metals. International Battery Metals currently traded shares on the Canadian Stock Exchange on ticker IBAT, with over-the-counter market ticker RHHNF. Again, John, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.